fourth presentation of the research and analysis work series that we have started at DMEO. We are very excited to welcome one of our newest members, Nikita Jain, to present her collaborative work with Mr. Siddharth Rathore, who is currently an associate professor at Delhi University. So together they'll be presenting their work on uptick in India's headline inflation, a transitory phase. So through their presentation, they'll be discussing how they have utilized recent CPI data and the past inflation trends in India to analyze whether the CPI numbers increased in the recent times can be attributed to transitory or persistent factors. At the same time, they'll also be discussing how they have used the Tableau software to come up with the infographics for their paper. We are also very happy to welcome, from what I've come to understand, the students of Mr. Siddharth Rathore at Delhi University. So I welcome everyone. I extend my warm welcome to all of the students from Delhi University who are also joining this meeting. So without any further delay, if you could please start your presentation.
Good evening, all. Thank you, Aditya, for the introduction, and thank you, Research and Analysis Wing, for giving us the opportunity to present our thought article. So today we are going to talk about the Consumer Price Index through infographics, and I would like to introduce myself and Siddharth sir as well. So I am Nikita Jain. I have recently joined DMEO. I'm from Indian Economic Services and in the vertical 1. Siddharth sir?
Just a second. Yes, hi. Thank you everyone for welcoming me to this particular platform. And my name is Siddharth and I'm an assistant professor. So there's a correction. I'm not an associate professor. I'm an assistant professor in the university. I teach at Gargi College, where Nikita has also passed out from. So she was a student of mine during 2013-2016 batch. And we've collaborated on a couple of articles after she's gone into the service. So our association dates back to 2013, and I'm extremely happy to share whatever we've done on this particular platform. In the initial portion, Nikita will be explaining about the inflation part, and I will take on from the methodology and then the use of the Tableau software and how the analytics went into creating a kind of a dashboard. Also, I've also sent a link on the chat whereby when I'll be showing you the dashboard, you can just click on that particular link and the dashboard will open on your particular laptop as well. So when I'll be discussing the dashboard, please have a look at the dashboard simultaneously on a different window. So it'll render better on a laptop or a PC rather than on a mobile.
So now going to the outline of our presentation. So can we have the full screen, please? Yeah, thank you. So the outline of our presentation is that first we are going to talk about what was the motivation behind this topic and why we chose CPI as one of the macroeconomic indicators to analyze. Then I'll be talking about the sub-indexes and our findings of the analysis. Then in the second half, we'll be, as sir told, that we'll be talking about the methodology followed and the use of Tableau and infographics. So this is our thought piece, and the motivation behind this topic was basically that there was a increase in the CPI inflation for 2 consecutive months, and it actually breached the 6% threshold limit. And there was a lot of debate going around that is it a transitory phase or is it durable inflation? Because it matters because the forward guidance of the RBI monetary policy depends on how the inflation is panning out. And as we know that there is always a trade-off between growth and inflation, it is really important to understand that how sticky inflation is. So this was the motivation why we thought that we need to develop an independent opinion of our own and think that is it really going to stick or not. So that is why we decided to write this thought piece. Now, before delving into the analysis, I'll first like to talk about what is inflation, so that all of the audience who might not be from an economics background or does not know what inflation is, they will better understand the presentation. So CPI, as we commonly know it as headline inflation, is an index basically which measures the retail inflation. So there's a basket of commodities and items which is basically taken as the most common goods and services, and the prices of these are compared to the prices currently over a specific period of time to see that what is the price change in the basket of commodities. So this actually tells you that if there is inflation in economy or not. There are multiple indexes like CPI industrial workers, there is CPI for agriculture laborers, etc. But in our article, we used the CPI, which is calculated by CSO, which is an all India combined index collected by CSO MOSPI. So this is what we were working on. Now, why is it important for you and me or a common person to understand inflation? How does inflation actually matters? So basically, whatever you are earning or whatever we are earning in our salary, it's a nominal figure. To understand that what is the purchasing power of that money which we are earning, we need to understand what is the inflation in the economy. And that is why it really hurts every person in our country. And the real wages, the salaries, pensions, all are determined actually by what is the inflation level in the economy. It is also used as a deflator in the national accounts to calculate the real output in the economy. And after 2016, when RBI was given the mandate to actually decide a medium-term inflation targeting mechanism was put as a mandate for RBI, inflation, the CPI number actually became more important from then. So now coming on from here to see that how the trend or how the CPI has been behaving for the past few years and recently in the last 2 months, we see that the gray part, which actually shows you the tolerance band of the inflation, which is 2 to 6% target. 4% is basically 4% is basically the main inflation target, and 6%
My
plus and minus.
husband's blood group is also O positive. O negative जिनका होता है, they can give, they can हाँ, O negative का तो काफी उल्टा हो गया ना.
I think there is some
जैसे मेरी cousin थी.
Hi Shruti. Shruti, I request you to please mute yourself.
तो O negative. 1.5 दिन लग गया था खून में. हाँ. कहीं खून नहीं है.
Aditya, can you just mute Shruti? Whoever is the host can mute her.
Yeah, Vaishvi, if you can just quickly mute Shruti. Thank you.
आराम से.
Okay, so I think it's muted now.
Yeah, please go ahead,
Yeah.
Nikita.
Yeah.
Sorry for the
Thank you.
interruption.
No problem. So now coming on back to the trend of inflation, which has been in the past few years and especially the past few months, we see that it has been, it was actually in the tolerance band of the RBI, but from since the COVID infected, even before that, since October 2019, it actually has been above 4% mostly. In a few months, it actually came down also. But if you see the factors which were behind this increase in the inflation during the COVID-1 wave, they were mostly supply side factors and they were considered to be transitory in nature. Another factor was also some food inflation, which was a major factor during that period of time. But we're not analyzing that phase. Our article mostly focused on the June print, which was basically because of a number of factors, which was supply side as well as demand side. If you see the June number, which was 6.26% to be precise, was almost on a flat basis from May, which was 6.3%. The factors which were in the news were food, fuel, etc. But we have tried to analyze that what behind them was, what were the major items within the sub-indexes which were behind this whole inflation hike. Also, this whole debate is very important because in the last few months, we were also seeing the green shoots in our economy, which showed that there might be some nascent recovery after the COVID-1 disaster. And actually, there was some GST improvement. GST high frequency data showed that the collections were improving. The PMI data also showed some improvement, but the RBI could not basically ease or tighten its policy suddenly, because it would have hurt again growth, which was very nascent in state. So from here, then let's go on to the first sub-index within inflation, which is food. So within the basket, 45%, around 45% of the basket of inflation is basically food item. And here it becomes the most important part of determining what the inflation is going to be. And if you see the graph on the right hand side, you see that in the first wave, it was actually contributing a lot, but in the current phase, in the last 2 months, the inflation has been below 6%, which is in the tolerance limit. But then there is two caveats which I would like to mention. The first is that this is because of the high base of the past month. So even if the number has been below 6%, we have to be mindful that this is on a very high base of the past year number, because we are calculating it on a YOY basis. So this makes it worrisome, because the number might look subdued, but if we remove the base effect from here, then the number might actually be very high. And now when we analyze that, what were the factors behind food inflation, there were multiple items which hiked suddenly and which have been on a rise for the past few months. One of the most important ones was the edible oils. And if you see that the average increase in the prices of edible oils for past few months on a YOY basis, it has been more than 50% actually. And India's import, most of its demand, like more than 60% demand of edible oils is basically imported. So this actually is not in the hands of the policymakers in our country, and it is actually, we are dependent on the international edible oil prices. So it is like an imported inflation part. It might have been sticky in nature, but the government actually took some steps and they cut on some duties, import duties, which will now in the next 2 to 3 months will pan out, and you can see some easing in the edible oils. So this was one of the things which we saw, that it might be sticky in the month which we analyzed, but in the coming months, in the future months, it might actually come down because the custom duties have already decreased. Also, the prices hike in pulses and other commodities of the food might now be eased out, because monsoon has been on track, though some downside risks still remain because of the incessant rains. But we can see that in the next harvest, when it comes in the market, the prices of food might come down. So overall, this factor now remains in our control, and it seems to be transitory in nature. Now, coming on next, sub-index, which is again having the second highest weightage in the CPI basket. It is the miscellaneous items. So to basically make sense of the miscellaneous item, I will explain that what all comes under this. So it has, first of all, 28% of the weightage in the CPI basket, and items like household goods and services, health, transportation costs, communication, recreation, amusement, education, and personal care items basically come under the miscellaneous items basket. Now, if you see the graph on the right-hand side, we can see that the print of June actually remained flat on a YOY basis compared to May. But this overall sub-index has remained above the 6% mark for more than 12 months now. And this is actually a very big concern, because this is not even driven by the supply side factors. It is majorly because of the demand side factors. We can miscellaneous items is often called as the service driven inflation. And if you analyze, and when we dig deeper into what were the items within miscellaneous which were causing this inflation, we found out that health and transportation increased on a YOY basis tremendously in the past few months. There can be multiple reasons, and we can attribute which can be attributed for this rise. But going forward, also this remains a concern, because as we are seeing that demand is picking up for different items, there may be some possibility of this remaining sticky in nature, because as the demand for these services, household services, amusement, education, etc. increases, the prices may still remain in the higher bracket. So this is one of the factors which even in the coming months might be sticky in nature. Now, talking about the third important sub-index of CPI basket is basically fuel and light index. So when you say that food, what is the percentage or contribution of fuel and light in the CPI basket, it is around 6.84%, which is around 7%. You see the last 3 months on the right-hand side in the graph. It actually shows that how this has risen. This hike has been tremendous in the last 3 months. Inflation even hardened to like more than 12% in June on a YOY basis for the fuel and light index. Now, the reason behind this hike was majorly because of the rising crude oil prices, which actually breached the $75 barrel mark, and translating into the prices of petrol and diesel, basically around 100 rupees. So this has actually increased the overall CPI inflation. But being a non-core factor, this might still again not be of very much concern, because recently there was also a OPEC plus deal which finally concluded, and there was then agreement that the output cut, which was there in place for a very long time, might now be eased out. So we can see some increase in the supply of commodity of crude oil in the future, and which might then again reflect into the prices of fuel in our country. So this again not be a sticky component of inflation, and since it's a non-core factor, I think we don't have to worry much about it. So that's now we will talk about the methodology. So these were the findings and mostly what we wrote the article on, but there was a lot of work behind this analysis, and whatever methodologies, the Excel sheets, etc. we used, Siddharth sir will be talking about it, and we'll also be talking about the whole process of how we collected the data, how we collaborated together and worked sitting at our homes, because all of this collaboration was majorly done online. So Siddharth sir will talk from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikita. So let me start with the entire process. So what I'll do is I'll first start with the visualization process, because that will interest the most of the participants, and then I'll go back to how the data was collected and how we use that data to basically transform our Excel sheets, because ultimately Tableau works on different data sets. One of the data sets that it ingests in its system is a kind of an Excel sheet, or a CSV sheets. So what we can do is either you can click on this particular link, and simultaneously on your browser a dashboard will open. So it's a public dashboard that I've created for this. Or what I'll also do simultaneously, just a second. Yeah, what I'll also do is I will show you the dashboard. Yes. So if you see the dashboard, this is the dashboard that we have created for inflation, and the first diagram is basically, the first infographic is basically a line trend of the CPI inflation, whereby we can see that from 2017 onwards how the inflation has risen, and you can use a number of parameters on this particular graph to basically, as soon as the graph goes beyond the threshold limit, it turns out to be into the red zone. And as Nikita had pointed out, that after September 2019, if you can see, after September 2019, it has been continuously over the median level of 4%, and right now the print is 6.3%. Now if you switch the graph to the next one, here we have the bar graphs. So the line chart has a utility in terms of understanding the trend, whereas if you want to go towards a granular approach of why inflation is increasing or what factors are basically leading it, then a bar graph turns out to be a better option. And what we have created here is a kind of a drop down. Now what this drop down does is it's a multi-dimensional drop down. So these are the 6 indicators which are there in the inflation basket, as mentioned by Nikita. So if we select the first one of the most important factors, food combined, so we can see, as Nikita was suggesting, that food as a factor was a pretty huge issue during the first lockdown phase and in the pre-COVID phase as well. So on this higher base, we see that the inflation in the last 3 months, although it's been rising, but still under the 6% barometer. So infographics, what infographics does it basically tells the entire audience without even going through any particular text that what is happening in the economy. So similarly, you can click on simultaneously if you want. You can click on the miscellaneous items because that also has a huge weight, and thereby you can see that how it has panned out in the previous few months. Similarly, you can then also see other factors like housing, clothing, or other factors, for example, intoxicants. So all these factors can be seen through bar graphs. Now coming to the next picture, that next infographic that we have created. Just a second, it's taking a little time for rendering. Now, this is basically a spatial analysis of inflation. Now, what we had done is that the way MOSPI gives out figures is it gives out the national figures. It also gives out regional figures in terms of state-wise inflation, both rural and urban inflation. So we took the data. I'll show you the data sources from where we took the data, and then we analyzed that data. And this analysis is a spatial analysis where we can see, if you see the combined figure. So this is a year on year June 2021 on June 2020 inflation. And we can see that there is quite a bit of green here, whereby green is suggesting that inflation is more or less under control, whereby red color is basically showing you that the inflation in these particular states is basically surging ahead. Now, the issue at hand, how this map helps us, the spatial analysis helps us, is that we've understood from a lot of economists, and it's been in the news and it has been in the print media as well, that this time around a major issue is with rural inflation. Inflation is now hitting the poorest or the bottom of the pyramid, people at the bottom of the pyramid. And that are basically our spatial map of rural India, of rural inflation suggests. So because we can see that most of the most populous states in the country are facing high levels of inflation. And when we go towards a much more granular approach to this, we find that much of this inflation is being fueled by factors like edible oil inflation, pulses inflation. We see a huge amount of spending on health and transport. So perhaps because of COVID, the second wave of COVID, the out-of-pocket expenditure that the people are paying has been increasing, and that's why we see that there is an uptick in the rural inflation. Although I must mention the caveat here is that when we compare May 2021's print with respect to June 2021 print, we see that the rural inflation has gone down a little bit, but still I would say that this is a matter of concern, whereby one of the policy objectives would be that how do we put more money onto the hands of people to basically compensate for this excessive inflation. And if we can also see the urban inflation here. So this drop down eases a projection of how inflation is being moving across spatial aspects. Then in the last part, this particular graph, I'd like to explain you with the PPT that we have. Give me one. Yes. Now, if we see what is happening here, is what we did was that we wanted to see that what is the factor which is contributing towards inflation. Now, we already have the weights of each of these indicators. We have the weights of each of these indicators when we know that food comprises of somewhere around 45%. We know that miscellaneous is somewhere around 28%. We know housing, fuel, and other factors as well. So if we know the contribution, how much each particular factor is contributing to the inflation, so the contribution has to be 100% of all these 6 factors. Now, if we can see that how much is each factor contributing, we can also analyze that whether a particular category is punching above its weight or not. For example, we see that in the months where the CPI inflation for food was high, whereas its weight in the index is 45%, it was punching way ahead of its entire weight. So these were the months where food inflation was a major issue, and we now see that the food inflation has gone down, and in fact it's now punching below its own contribution. However, what we see, what a major cause of concern could be, that if we see the weight of miscellaneous items, while it carries a weight of 28% in the basket, historically its weight in the inflation was not much, was not that huge. But now we see during after, especially after January, if we see the kind of weight that it's punching in terms of its contribution to inflation, it's huge. So and for the last 2 months, although it's been decreasing, but see, if we see in the month of May, in the month of April, we see that its weight was huge, and this is perhaps, and this we can see it's basically because of the health expenditure that the people were burning out, and possibly because of the out of pocket health expenditure that the people were spending on, and the rise in prices. The other factor that we can see here is that while fuel again carries a weight of somewhere around 6%, 6 to 7%, its contribution to inflation in the last three prints has been somewhere around 12%. And as Nikita had explained, that this is perhaps because of the rising oil prices. Now coming to the other part of this was about the visualization part. Now coming to the part of how did we collaborate in terms of data, how did we get the data access, and how did we turn it into a renderable Excel sheet. Let me show you that. Now if you see, the data has been taken from the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. Now they have this consumer price index as a separate tab, and here you can find out all the weights and all the details of inflation. You can easily find it. And what we need to do is we just need to take the back series time series the time series data from the current series, and then it provides us a window where we can select that from what date do we need the inflation data from. It can also give us all, whether we want it for all states or for the entire country, or we want it for a particular state. That is possible. So what we did was we checked out all the factors, because we also wanted to do a spatial analysis. And then we wanted all the groups, so you can take all the groups, and what it does it takes a little bit of time. But then what it does it gives a CSV file or an Excel file to download. You can easily download it, and once you have downloaded that, then the important part comes. So this is the publicly available data that we use. Then comes the main part, because analysis on Tableau has to be done. Tableau takes a pre-processed data, so it's just a visualization tool. The analysis has to be done on Excel. So this is the kind of raw data that we get from the MOSPI website. Now we converted it into this is the kind that we get. So we need to convert it into percentage points. That what is the percentage? So you apply the formula of growth rate in each particular parameter, and then you can easily get the growth rates for each particular sub-indexes. Then this is perhaps the more interesting part, because this is where we started analyzing that how do we get the contribution chart. So for contribution chart, what we did was we multiplied whatever is the index value. So if you see, what we did was we multiplied. Let's talk about that. How do we get the contribution for a particular variable? So for getting that, what we did is that we have the index value of clothing and footwear. Let's take the month of June 21. So we have this index, June 21 index. We have this 160. This is the clothing value. This is the indices value. So we multiplied it with its weight. This is the weight multiplication. We multiplied it with its weight. and we got the contribution of of this particular index. So this what is this 161 telling us? 161 is the overall index value of the entire CPI combined. Now this is nothing but a weighted average. This is a weighted average of these 6 factors. So when we talk about a weighted average, it's basically nothing but the weight multiplied by the index, the weight multiplied by the index. So this is how we got this 161 value. Now, once we have calculated this 161 value, all we need to do is that what is the contribution? So you divide it by the entire figure. So you divide, either what you can do is 10 divided by 161. So you will get out the exact inflation, the exact contribution of each particular factor. And thereby you just upload this particular file to Tableau, and then does the analysis for you. Then in terms of states, the last part that I wanted to talk about in states, this is how we get the data in terms of states. So you need to filter out all the factors of states and then find out the growth rates, and then Tableau will easily ingest this particular kind of format. It takes the date values and it automatically finds out the states. So that is a geotagging that Tableau has the ability of. So it geotags all the particular states, and then it also takes out the figures that we are giving it. So this is how we have done the entire analysis of inflation in spatial factors, as well as in terms of temporal analysis. So I think that was about our presentation. We'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Nikita and Siddharth, for your lovely presentation, and also for taking us through the methodology as to how you have used Tableau to come up with your analysis. So as you can see on the chat window, so there are several questions. So would you like to take them one by one, or should we just ask them to raise the questions by unmuting
we can take them
themselves?
one by one.
It's better. Yeah, it's better to take them one by one.
Okay, sure. So I think the first one is by Paresh.
Thanks, Aditya.
Yeah.
I think my question is more on the methodology that is used for CPI inflation. So I understand the breakup is by various products. Now my bigger question is, each of these products has a logistical component in it, which is dependent on the fuel prices. So there could be an indirect impact of fuel. So while the direct impact is clear, but there is an indirect impact which is also included in each of these products. So is there a way to find out what has been the actual impact of fuel prices on the inflation? It should be much higher than what is being projected currently. So yeah.
So may I take this one, and then you can add if you want to.
Sure.
Yeah, so yeah, Parish, it is actually correct, because if you see the prices of food, then the food truck, which is actually just take example of tomatoes. Basically, if you are taking the prices of tomatoes, then it might be actually that the cost of transporting tomatoes from one mandi to another is being reflected in the prices of tomato, and that's why the prices, actually the inflation might be the prices of oil might be impacting the other components as well. But I don't think so. I mean, maybe I'm not aware of it, but I don't think so that you can actually separate the effect, because economy, everything is linked with each other. If you come on to that, then food might be actually impacting some other prices. So everything is linked. It's not just that crude prices or just the prices of fuel are actually impacting food. There might be some many linkages within the items of the CPI basket itself. But I don't think so that we can actually separate the effect of it to see.
So if I may come in, this is Param, just to add to what Nikita said. But it's actually the impact of oil prices on the, so for example, any food commodity price inflation. So I think that is factored in already. So if you want to take it, so any food commodity price inflation, if you take that, factors in all the cost component that goes into it across the value chain till the final destination. So that's one of the component is transportation, which is directly impacted by the fuel price. So when you talk about the inflation and how the fuel prices impact the inflation, that is already accounted for in that price. So in that case, I think it will become a double counting if you again separately add the fuel price inflation on top of the price inflation of the other commodity.
Okay. Can I come in with Anthony here? So the methodology normally used is there is something called input-output analysis. Input-output tables are there, and IO tables have something called an absorption matrix, which gives the metrics the input-wise contribution to the output of each item. It's separated into 160 items. So input contribution of fuel to the production of food can be taken out for each item separately, and that weight multiplied by the fuel inflation can give us the contribution of fuel to the food inflation. It can be done through national accounts.
Thanks, sir. Professor Siddharth, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, that'll be a great exercise to do. I think that is something that can be taken up as a next challenge in terms of how to find out the value. But to add to that, if you see the services basket, you will see transportation of goods and services. So I think a portion of the inflation, because the transportation cost is directly attributed because of the one of the factors is the fuel inflation. So that factor is perhaps also absorbed in the services sector inflation basket as well.
Thank you so much, everyone, to respond to that question. I was just curious to know the real impact. This is only fuel, and Nikita, as you pointed out, and as Anthony said, also highlighted, we could come up with an approach to find out the real impact rather than just going with what is impacting fuel prices. Thank you so much. Back to you, Aditya and Nikita.
So the next question is by Maitri. Maitri, would you like to ask a question? So it's on the chat window as well.
Yeah, so thank you first of all for the presentation. It was a lovely presentation. So my question was that we have all noticed that RBI has been cutting down the repo rates over a couple of months in the last year. So in order to increase the liquidity in the market, and we know that the gestation period generally lasts for 8 to 9 months. So could the slashing of repo rates be one of the factors that we are observing such a increase in the inflation rate in the last couple of months?
Maitri, I would like to add some points. Siddharth, so then you can come with your points. So I think what you are saying is that basically RBI is cutting the rates, and so there is a lot of money supply in the market, and then there is more money chasing few goods. Is that right? If you're trying to ask this,
that's what the demand supply mismatch.
Yeah, so I think first of all, we have to understand that the liquidity which the RBI has given in the market is actually not been transmitted properly. If you see that the banking surplus liquidity which is staying with the banks, so RBI, even after they are cutting the repo rates, this liquidity is actually with the banks, not with the people. So it takes a lot of time to actually, this transmission of monetary policy takes a lot of time. And I don't think so it's just 9 months, because the banks are sitting on a lot of liquidity present in the system. So there was also a lot of debate around that why the banks why are the banks not actually transmitting this liquidity which has been created by RBI. So my whole point is that the liquidity which you are seeing in the market is with the banks, and it is not actually in the hands of the public. So I am not sure if this could be a factor for inflation. Sir, you can come in and tell me if there is.
So Maitri, the issue here is that the inflation that we are seeing right now is perhaps, and across the world, what we are seeing is perhaps because one of the major factors is the supply side inflation. So the typical factors here for inflation is not basically money. I mean, a lot of money in the market chasing fewer goods. The factor here is that the constraints in terms of supply side. So if we see that just preceding these months was the lockdown. So I mean, if you compare it with the lockdown 1.0, lockdown 1.0 was a national lockdown. But here, what has happened is every state had its own policy of supply chain, and that entire supply chain management was hit because of individual state lockdowns. And that is also reflected there. There's an indicator that we had showed in our previous paper, previous article in ORF, where we have displayed the time series analysis, the time trend analysis of what is called as Google mobility. So if you see the Google mobility indicators, we see that most of these indicators had dropped very sharply again in the month of March, mid, April, and May. So which reflects that if the mobility is being restricted, that means the supply chains have been cut down, and that is what is fueling the inflationary factors. Now, the question now here is that how till how long can RBI afford when the inflation is ahead of its threshold? How long can RBI perhaps afford this particular inflation being ahead of its parameter? So the analysis which RBI has taken, or the kind of processing that RBI has taken right now, is that it is taking this inflation to be transitory, that it will ease down with time, and it does not want to restrict, it does not want to go for a rate hike right now, where when the progress or when the growth is at a very nascent stage. Also to point out that right now we are not completely vaccinated. Our vaccination rate is around still around 40-50%, and apart from the fact that we could possibly have an impact of COVID 3.0. So that again, taking into all these factors, right now RBI is deciding not for a rate hike. And similar has been the logic across the advanced economies. If you see in US as well, the inflation has been increasing, but yet Jeremy Powell had recently talked about the fact that we are still going to wait and watch before we go for a hike, and that will again bring a lot of implication in terms of what we saw in 2013 when we talk about taper tantrum impact. So right now we see that this inflation is more so because of the supply side factors being built in. Demand side factors could have an uptake, especially as Nikita said. The service side inflation could perhaps pick up in the coming months, but right now we see it as a transient factor.
Thank you so much for that answer. Thank you.
Thank you for your response, Mr. Siddharth. And we have the next question by Anand, and following that, we have another question by Anmol. If you could take them, if you can refer to the questions on the chat window, or like if Anand and Anmol, you
No,
could ask the
actually,
questions.
yeah. Thanks, Aditya, and thanks, Nikita and Sir, for an excellent presentation. My message in the chat is rather a comment rather than a question. And building on what Maitri was saying, and if you look at the reports, roughly for about 115 basis point cuts in the repo rate and about 155 basis point cut in 2020 for the reverse repo rate, the transmission in fact has been pretty good in the sense because there has been correspondingly about 107 basis point reduction in the average lending rates of NBFCs and about 140 basis point, sorry, the other way around, 140 basis point reduction for NBFCs and about 110 basis point reduction in the lending rates for trade. So I do not think the hypothesis of transmission is something which I think we needs to be looked at slightly more in detail. And the fact that correspondingly, if you look at the category-wise variations in the inflation as shown by the analysis that has been undertaken, a large contribution coming in from the miscellaneous category, as you were rightly pointing out, which is the services part of the consumption, is something because typically food is sticky, food inflation, and therefore when we are talking of services is most likely to be sensitive to monetary expansion, and hence it might possibly be also throwing light in the direction in which Maitri was pointing out, that there may be contributions coming from the money supply factors as well. So possibly it can be looked at as a part of the analysis as well for the factors. So that's all I wanted to share.
Thanks, Anand. Anmol, if you could ask your question now.
Yeah. I just wanted to ask a question in relation to the miscellaneous component contributing to inflation and how it has increased. So we understand that a lot of it might be coming from out-of-pocket health expenditure, but are there other significant drivers within this category that might be relevant? Thanks.
I'll take this, Nikita.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So there are two major factors. Let me check if I have that file open. I don't think I have that file open. Basically, if we see the inflation, the components of miscellaneous, whether we talk about rural or whether we talk about combined or we talk about urban, all these three major baskets, health contributes somewhere around 5 to 6% percent to this particular basket, and transport is also a major factor. And if we see, both health and transport are taking off. However, there are other factors like education, like personal services. These factors are still subdued, but as we had explained, that as the economy picks up, as the vaccination pace picks up, people will start moving out. People will start demanding these services, and because there is sufficient amount of liquidity in the system, this could possibly lead to the change will perhaps lead to from health and transport expenditure to personal services expenditure. Let me show it to you here. Yes. So as we talked about household goods and services, health, transport, communication, recreational. So on one hand, once the vaccination process is taken off, in terms of once a substantial amount of people are vaccinated by the year end, we will see a declining trend in terms of this health inflation, the out-of-pocket expenditure. And when there is sufficient amount of herd immunity in the system, in the economy or in the country, then we will also see that these localized lockdowns will perhaps not be needed, and this transport factor will again come down. However, on the contrary, what might happen is that because of the excess liquidity in the system, and because there will be substantial herd immunity, and people will start coming out of their homes, people will start going to offices, life will perhaps start to normalize by the fourth quarter of this fiscal, then we might see that there will be an additional tailwind towards the inflation because of factors like recreational, amusement, personal care items. So all of these factors, household goods and services, so these might then perhaps create a demand side to inflation, which should be taken care of at that point of time. And that is why, if you see all the print analysis or whatever is coming out of the Main Street as well, we see that the rollback of this ultra loose monetary policy will perhaps be seen in the early part of next calendar year or in the first quarter of the next fiscal year.
Thank you so much. Are there any further questions? So if we don't have any further questions.
Aditya,
Yeah.
this is Paresh. Sorry, I'm
Yeah,
coming in
Paresh.
again. While it might not be totally related to today's presentation, but I was curious to know that, generally the common knowledge is whenever the inflation is high, the employment rate typically goes down. But in the current scenario, we are seeing the both indicators going higher. Inflation is also rising, and unemployment is showing no signs of reducing. We have so many economists in the group here, so I thought if we can open up for some views here, what explains this?
I think what he's referring to is basically he's asking that are we in a stagflationary mode? Sir, would you like to take on that?
So typically, we are not in a stagflationary mode. So when you talk about stagflation, you see that the output has to be receding, and the unemployment has to increase. If we see in terms of the official data, although the periodic labor force survey data was recently released, but usually what we go by in terms of high frequency soft indicator is the CMI data, although we don't take it in terms of official figures, at least we don't acknowledge it. if we see that it's improving after the second wave, the employment levels have started to increase, although we are still behind the 2019 numbers. At least a couple of percentage points, if I recollect correctly. However, when we talk about in terms of growth, India is expected to grow somewhere around 9.5% in this fiscal. So the question of stagflation, at least for this particular year, where you'll find high inflation and low output, and perhaps low employment, that is perhaps not valid for at least for this particular year. And in terms of employment, we will see that as the vaccination levels increase, as there is more amount of herd immunity that comes into the economy, we will find people coming back to their jobs. The manufacturing will start taking up. The MSMEs, which are the major factors for employment, that will come to play again. So I would say that will again take somewhere around 5 to 6 months for things to normalize on that front as well.
Thanks, Professor. Back to you, Aditya.
Thanks so much for your response. Oh, there's somebody who wants to.
No, can I come in, Aditya?
Oh,
Anthony?
yes, sir. Yes.
No, when we talk about such macroeconomic relationships, my limited understanding is that we can examine them only in over a fairly long term, and especially in unprecedented circumstances like this, I don't think we should examine these macroeconomic relationships. Perhaps the period, let's say after the second global, the 2013 post and 2017, 18, 19, 17, 18 is again a milestone year for India. So during those 3-4 years, perhaps we can test, but then not now, perhaps. Also, now the question of levels versus growth. So that is an important issue here. Now, inflation is a growth. Inflation is the first difference of the level of the index. So that gets compounded. It's a mysterious figure because it has a base of 2011, and then it gets added, subtracted, base lows, base lowers, base goes up, etc. So I think we should have a mechanism to check the levels also. For example, in the Consumer Affairs Ministry, there is retail price data, rich retail price data on 23 essential commodities, which would constitute a most part of the food weight in consumer price index. I think those levels need to be analyzed as well. But wonderful. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Back to you, Aditya.
Thank you, sir. Do we have any more questions? If we don't have any questions, then I'll request DG sir to kindly provide his remarks.
I just have a last comment to make.
Okay.
So this was just a I mean, we both, I and Siddharth sir, have a lot of interest in Indian economics, and this was just an attempt to analyze what is going on in the economic indicators. I think it will be very interesting that the timing of the presentation actually matches with the upcoming RBI monetary policy, and whoever has attended today, so tomorrow they can actually see what RBI is doing, because tomorrow is the bi-monthly monetary policy meeting. So it will be very interesting to see what is the take on the rates basically by RBI tomorrow. And the minutes, if you read the minutes of the meeting, then you get a better understanding of how RBI is seeing inflation, because this is an independent analysis of how we see inflation, but how the RBI is seeing inflation, you will know that from the minutes of RBI meeting. So just wanted to add that. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Nikita. Sir, please.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks, Aditya. At the outset, I want to thank Professor Siddharth Rathore and Nikita for the excellent presentation. I was also very keen to also learn a little bit about Tableau, so thank you. So I hope Siddharth, you would continue to engage with my team through through Nikita, and maybe at some stage my other colleagues also directly get in touch with you. My own sense about inflation, no one actually can really explain why the world has seen such low inflationary environment for such a long period of time. And some say it's because of globalization, production shifting to China, and whatever it is. But I think people have got accustomed to low inflation and low interest rates. I'm not talking about India, I'm talking about the rest of the world. And it has implications because if something happens in US markets, it's going to have a huge impact across the world. There might be flight of capital and stuff like that. But just to let my other colleagues know, 10-year US Treasury rates were as low as 1.7 in 1945, immediately after Second World War. They shot up as high as 15.8 in somewhere in 1981, when Walker had to come in and force a lot of pain on US government, elected government, as well as citizens to control uncontrolled inflation. And maybe because of that discipline since 1990s, US had reasonably low inflation rate, low interest rates, and steady growth since then. And in a way, I think a lot of recent central bank efforts to boost growth by reducing interest rates and increasing liquidity and going for all sort of purchases of bonds and so forth. Definitely, I mean, where has it gone? It should have led to inflation. So obviously that money could have gone into the banks, as Nikita said. But I mean, the people are very enterprising. And majority of it has gone into assets, whether it is stock market or real estate or so forth. So right now, I think we are in unprecedented inflation of assets, whether it is S&P or Nasdaq or maybe NSE or BSE. And the only thing that will finish this this bubble is serious inflation. Maybe we are not yet there, but at some particular point, this party is going to end. We are not going to have low interest regime for a long period of time. So, and when that happens, and I think the economists are divided whether we are still in an upward trend or it is transitory, but at some particular point it's going to happen. And one thing that's particularly worrying is if you look at Schiller PE index, rolling 3-year S&P, it's almost touching the highest point. It's around 36 or so, and 45 was the highest during 2008 bubble, pre-2008 bubble. So clearly, I think it's worrying, and anyone who is interested in any of the markets, I think inflation is the one which is going to really decide. The other point is there are a lot of structural supply side issues which have also contributed to inflation, increase in logistics costs, shipping. Those are largely influenced by COVID-related constraints. And there seems to be a sense that, get vaccinated, we are just going to go back to previous normal, I don't think that's going to happen. Honestly, the virus is mutating. There is breakthrough infections. I think we are going to live with this virus for a longer period than what we are thinking right now. We might have to have booster vaccines. The healthcare costs and all of them are going to create more costs, and also the supply chain and others are not going to be as efficient as it used to be. There are significant impacts, whether you look at semiconductor supply chips and so forth. So the point is, and the world is so interconnected, and there's so much of contagion if something happens in US. I think, and the most important I feel is that the central bankers have probably got accustomed to loose monetary policies with the hope that inflation will continue to remain low as before. But I think one needs to remember ourselves that there are situations even in Germany between First World War and Second World War, the type of runoff inflations that happened where wealth of people has just disappeared. So I think we had a very good discussion on a very, very important topic at a time where I think this is going to be how we manage inflation in India and across the world will decide how the welfare, what would be the welfare, and also on a longer term, how well we can continue to depend on inflated asset prices to create sense of wealth, which can also lead to increasing sense of increasing purchasing. Increasing inflated assets create a sense of wealth, which leads to greater consumption. So that's also another thing that could happen. So great presentation, very well done, and I just hope we'll have more of this type of good presentations. So Paresh and Aditya, raw team, you have set very high benchmarks. So now I just hope you will continue to keep up the game. Thank you.
Thank you, Shekhar sir, and I'm extremely happy to coordinate with DMEO, and I was actually very happy to see its website and the kind of work that it does. And Nikita, when she joined Niti, she told me that what is the exact profile of DMEO, and I was very happy that there could be a lot of work in terms of creating dashboards or analyzing schemes for the government. So that's again something that we have on our mind for future collaborations. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Siddharth and Nikita, for your presentation once again. Thank you, DG sir, for your comments, and everyone for keeping the session so interactive. So it will be well, so we'll try to keep the forthcoming sessions of RAW as interactive as possible, and we hope to see more such presentations. So I hope to see you next week. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thanks, Aditya. Thanks, Professor. Thanks, Nikita. Have a great